Picture this. Jesus dies at 33. Your spine has 33 vertebrae. Freemasonry's highest degree, 33. In Kabbalah, 33 represents the bridge between human and divine consciousness. Coincidence? Maybe. But when you discover that mystics like Francis of Assisi, Teresa of Avila, and Meister Eckhart all described remarkably similar stages of spiritual awakening, stages that seem to follow a precise numerical pattern, you start wondering if there's something deeper at work. What if Jesus wasn't just teaching parables and moral lessons? What if he was encoding a systematic map for consciousness evolution, hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years? The number 33 appears across cultures, spiritual traditions, and even human anatomy with startling consistency. It's like finding the same architectural blueprint in buildings that were supposedly designed independently across different continents and centuries. This isn't about religious doctrine or blind faith. It's about recognizing patterns that suggest our ancestors understood something profound about human consciousness, something that mainstream Christianity may have overlooked entirely. What if that map still exists, waiting to be decoded? When you look at the human spine, you're seeing something far more profound than medical textbooks will tell you. 33 vertebrae form the central column of your body, not 32, not 34, but precisely 33. Ancient traditions understood this wasn't mere biological coincidence. They recognized the spine as a sacred ladder, a pathway for consciousness itself to climb from the base of material existence to the crown of divine awareness. In the yogic traditions of India, this journey is called Kundalini, the serpent fire that lies coiled at the base of your spine. The word itself means coiled one, and the entire system maps directly onto those 33 vertebrae. As this energy rises through each level, consciousness transforms. What begins as basic survival, awareness at the root gradually ascends through emotional, mental, and finally transcendent states of being. But here's where it gets fascinating. This same architectural blueprint appears in completely different traditions that supposedly had no contact with each other. The Masonic lodges speak of 33 degrees, each representing a level of understanding, a rung on the ladder of spiritual development. The Scottish Rite culminates at the 33rd degree, which they call the apex of their philosophical system. Coincidence? Not when you understand that Freemasonry preserved ancient wisdom traditions that trace back to the mystery schools of Egypt and Greece. These weren't social clubs or business networks. The original mystery schools were universities of consciousness, teaching the science of human transformation. They understood that spiritual development follows precise laws, just like physics or chemistry. The number 33 kept appearing because it reflects something fundamental about how consciousness actually operates. In Kabbalistic tradition, we find another piece of this puzzle. The Tree of Life contains 32 paths of wisdom connecting the 10 Sephirot, the divine emanations. But there's a hidden 33rd path, known as the path of the middle pillar. This represents the direct route between human and divine consciousness, the bridge between the lower and upper worlds. It's the path of integration, where opposites unite and transformation becomes possible. Think about what Jesus demonstrated at age 33. Not just death, but conscious transformation, the ultimate integration of human and divine nature. The crucifixion wasn't just a historical event, it was a teaching about the death of the ego that must occur for true spiritual birth. The cross itself forms the intersection point, the place where horizontal earthly existence meets vertical divine connection. This cosmic architecture shows up everywhere once you know how to look. Sacred geometry reveals that certain proportions and numbers appear repeatedly in nature because they reflect fundamental structures of reality itself. The golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, the geometric patterns found in everything from nautilus shells to galaxy spirals. These aren't random. They're the mathematical signatures of consciousness expressing itself through form. Ancient architects knew this. The Great Pyramid's dimensions encode multiple cosmic constants. Gothic cathedrals were built according to precise geometric ratios that were supposed to elevate consciousness. The builders weren't just creating pretty buildings, they were constructing transformation machines, spaces designed to shift human awareness into higher states. Some of this knowledge was deliberately hidden from public view, and there are deeper layers we share exclusively in our free Insights Academy newsletter. where subscribers also receive a complimentary copy of the Kabbalion for a limited time, knowledge too sensitive for public platforms. But why hide this information? Because knowledge of consciousness transformation is power, real power. Not the kind that controls others, but the kind that liberates the individual from all external control. Throughout history, institutions have thrived by keeping people dependent, whether on religious intermediaries, political systems, or economic structures. When individuals understand the science of their own consciousness, they become ungovernable in the truest sense. The early Christian church faced a choice: preserve the transformational teachings, or create a system of worship and obedience. They chose the latter, turning a technology of consciousness into a religion of belief. The Gnostic Christians, who emphasized direct spiritual experience and inner knowledge, were systematically eliminated. Their texts were buried, literally, until discoveries like the Nag Hammadi library revealed what had been lost. Jesus himself would have understood these principles intimately. The historical evidence suggests he spent his missing years studying with various wisdom traditions, possibly the Essenes, definitely the mystery schools that still operated throughout the Mediterranean world. He wasn't inventing new spiritual principles. He was demonstrating universal ones that had been taught for millennia. When he spoke in parables, he was using the ancient method of encoding wisdom in stories that could survive persecution and misinterpretation. The parable of the mustard seed isn't just about faith, it's about how consciousness grows from a tiny point into something that transforms everything around it. The story of the prodigal son maps directly onto the soul's journey from unity through separation and back to integration. This is why his life story itself became the ultimate parable. Every major event, the virgin birth, the baptism, the transfiguration, the crucifixion, the resurrection, represents a stage in the development of consciousness. He wasn't just living these experiences, he was modeling them as a teaching tool for anyone who had eyes to see. The 33 years weren't arbitrary. They represented the complete curriculum, the full course in human transformation. Each year corresponded to a level of development, a degree of understanding, a vertebra in the spine of spiritual evolution. His life became a living mandala, a sacred geometry of consciousness made flesh. Modern science is beginning to validate what these ancient traditions understood. Neuroscience shows that meditation and contemplative practices literally rewire the brain. Quantum physics suggests that consciousness plays a fundamental role in the structure of reality itself. The boundaries between science and spirituality are dissolving, revealing that they were always studying the same phenomena from different angles. Understanding this cosmic architecture isn't just intellectual curiosity, it's practical knowledge for anyone serious about their own development. When you recognize that your spine is a sacred ladder, you can begin to work with it consciously. When you understand that spiritual growth follows natural laws, you can apply those laws systematically rather than hoping for random moments of grace. The question isn't whether this knowledge is real. The question is whether you're ready to apply it. Looking at the spiritual architecture we explored earlier, those 33 vertebrae, the sacred geometry embedded in reality itself, we begin to understand that awakening isn't some mystical accident. It follows a precise sequence, like DNA unfolding or a seed becoming a tree. The first 5 steps of this ancient map deal with something every person in modern society faces: breaking free from the matrix of ordinary consciousness. Step 1 begins with what I call the great dissonance, that moment when something deep inside you realizes that ordinary life isn't enough. You know this feeling. You wake up on a Tuesday morning, brush your teeth, check your phone, and suddenly feel like you're watching yourself from outside your body. The routine feels hollow. The goals that once motivated you seem small, meaningless even. This isn't depression or midlife crisis. It's your authentic self recognizing that you've been living below your potential. Jesus experienced this at 12 years old when he told his parents he had to be about his Father's business. Not rebellion against authority, but the first stirring of authentic self-expression breaking through societal conditioning. Modern psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, but ancient wisdom traditions understood it as the soul's wake-up call. Sarah, a marketing executive I know, described it perfectly. I was successful by every metric that mattered to my family and society. Good salary, nice apartment, impressive job title. But I felt like I was suffocating in someone else's life. That suffocation isn't personal failure, it's spiritual. Intelligence recognizing that you've outgrown the container of conventional existence. The second step requires accepting this inner call, which means withdrawing from external noise to listen to internal wisdom. This terrifies most people because we've been conditioned to believe that all answers come from outside ourselves: experts, authorities, Google searches, social media validation. Jesus demonstrated this when he left his carpentry work and began seeking teachers, not because carpentry was wrong, but because his inner compass was pointing towards something larger. In our hyper-connected world, this withdrawal becomes even more crucial. We're drowning in information but starving for wisdom. Digital detoxing isn't just trendy self-care, it's spiritual necessity. When you're constantly consuming other people's thoughts, opinions, and curated experiences, you literally cannot hear your own inner voice. The ancient practice of solitude, which every wisdom tradition emphasizes, becomes revolutionary in a culture that equates being alone with being lonely. Marcus, a software engineer, told me he started taking solo walks without podcasts or music. The first week was torture. My mind felt like a browser with 50 tabs open. But gradually, underneath all that mental chatter, I started hearing something else. My own thoughts, my own questions. It was like meeting myself for the first time. The third step confronts what Carl Jung called the shadow, those aspects of ourselves we've hidden, denied, or projected onto others. Jesus' 40 days in the desert weren't about religious ritual. They represent the archetypal confrontation with power, vanity, and control that every awakening person must face. The temptations Jesus encountered are remarkably specific. Turn stones to bread, the temptation to use spiritual power for personal comfort, jump from the temple, spiritual ego and showing off, and worship Satan for worldly kingdoms, trading authentic power for external control. These aren't ancient Middle Eastern concerns. They're the exact temptations facing anyone who begins developing real inner authority. Jennifer, a yoga teacher, discovered this when her spiritual practice started attracting attention. I caught myself posting more and more about my meditation experiences, my insights, my spiritual achievements. I realized I was turning my inner journey into external validation, seeking. That's when I understood what spiritual ego meant. Shadow work isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. When you stop projecting your disowned qualities onto others, you reclaim enormous amounts of energy that were locked up in judgment, resentment, and unconscious reactions. Step 4 involves learning sacred silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of deep listening. Modern minds are overwhelmed with information, opinions, and constant mental commentary. We've lost the ability to simply be present without doing, achieving, or consuming something. Sacred silence isn't meditation technique, it's a way of being that allows wisdom to emerge naturally. When you stop filling every moment with noise, distraction, or mental activity, space opens up for insights that can't be forced or figured out intellectually. This is why every wisdom tradition emphasizes contemplative practices, not because sitting quietly is inherently virtuous, but because silence becomes fertile ground for authentic knowing to emerge. The answers you seek aren't hiding in more books, courses, or expert opinions. They're waiting in the spaciousness that appears when you stop seeking. The fifth step transforms spirituality from theory to embodied living, practicing presence. This is where the rubber meets the road. Awakening isn't about having profound experiences during meditation retreats. It's about bringing that quality of awareness into ordinary activities. Washing dishes becomes a meditation on impermanence. Listening to a friend becomes practicing compassionate presence. Walking to your car becomes an opportunity to notice how your body moves through space. Every moment offers a choice, unconscious reactivity or conscious response. David, a financial advisor, explained how this transformed his work. I used to see clients as problems to solve or sales targets to hit. Now I listen differently. I'm present with their actual concerns, not just their investment portfolios. Paradoxically, my business improved dramatically when I stopped trying so hard to control outcomes. These 5 steps aren't religious requirements. They're natural stages of consciousness evolution that people from all backgrounds experience when they begin questioning surface-level existence. The ancient map Jesus left isn't about converting to a particular belief system. It's about awakening to capacities that lie dormant within human consciousness itself. What makes this process challenging isn't its complexity, but its simplicity. We've been conditioned to believe that transformation requires elaborate techniques, expensive programs, or years of study. The truth is more elegant. Awakening happens when you stop living unconsciously and start paying attention to what's actually happening in this moment. The next 5 steps of this ancient map reveal how this inner awakening begins transforming your relationship with others and the world around you. But first, these foundational shifts in consciousness must stabilize. You can't skip steps in this process any more than you can skip developmental stages in childhood. The matrix of ordinary consciousness isn't evil, it's simply incomplete. Like a caterpillar's cocoon, it serves its purpose until something larger is ready to emerge. The question isn't whether you'll face these 5 steps, but whether you'll recognize them when they appear and have the courage to follow where they lead. The moment you begin to truly awaken, something profound and terrifying happens. Everything you thought you were starts to die. And this death, this crucifixion of the false self, isn't a metaphor. It's the most real experience you'll ever have. Most people mistake this phase for failure. They think they're losing their way when they're actually finding it. The 6th step in this ancient map involves something that goes against every fiber of our social conditioning, releasing the desperate need for external validation and approval. This is where Jesus' journey becomes our mirror. Consider this. Jesus returned to Nazareth, his hometown, and preached in the synagogue. These were people who had watched him grow up, who knew his family, who had formed their opinions about who he was supposed to be. And what happened? They were offended by him. They couldn't accept that this carpenter's son might have something profound to offer. The Gospel of Mark tells us he could do no mighty works there because of their unbelief. But here's what's revolutionary about this moment. Jesus didn't change his message to make them comfortable. He didn't water down his truth to gain their acceptance. He experienced the full weight of rejection from the very people whose approval would have meant the most, and he kept walking his path. This is the psychological courage that step 6 demands from you. When your family questions your choices, when your friends think you've lost your mind, when society tells you that your authentic path is impractical or unrealistic, this is your Nazareth moment. The false self wants to retreat, to conform, to be accepted. But the true self knows that seeking approval from people who don't understand your journey is like asking a fish to validate your ability to fly. The 7th step cuts even deeper, breaking with inherited identities. This is where you begin to separate who you actually are from who you were programmed to become. Family expectations, cultural programming, social roles that once felt like your identity, they start falling away like old skin. I've watched people leave prestigious careers that were slowly killing their souls. A successful lawyer I know walked away from partnership to become a wilderness guide. His parents were devastated. His colleagues thought he'd had a breakdown, but he told me something I'll never forget. I realized I was living someone else's definition of success while my own soul was starving. This isn't about rejecting responsibility or running away from challenges. It's about recognizing that many of the identities we carry aren't ours. They're hand-me-downs from generations of people who never questioned whether these roles actually served human flourishing. Jesus modeled this radical break when he said, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" He wasn't being cruel to his family. He was demonstrating that spiritual growth sometimes requires transcending even our most sacred social bonds when they become constraints on our authentic development. The 8th step brings us face to face with emotional healing, and this is where many spiritual seekers get it backwards. They think enlightenment means transcending human emotions, bypassing pain, floating above the messy reality of psychological wounds. But Jesus shows us something entirely different. When Lazarus died, Jesus wept. Think about this. Here was someone who allegedly had power over death itself, and he didn't spiritually bypass his grief. He felt it fully. On the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This wasn't weakness. It was the most profound teaching about emotional authenticity you'll find anywhere. True spiritual growth requires you to go through your pain, not around it. Every trauma you've experienced, every wound you've accumulated, every moment of abandonment or betrayal, these aren't obstacles to enlightenment. They're the raw material for transformation. But only if you're willing to feel them consciously instead of numbing them with distractions, substances, or spiritual platitudes. The ninth step is what I call the symbolic desert. Those periods of apparent emptiness where all your external supports fall away and you're left alone with yourself. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness, but your desert might look like a divorce, a job loss, a health crisis, or simply that dark night of the soul where nothing makes sense anymore. Modern psychology calls some of these experiences depression, but what if we're misunderstanding their purpose? What if these aren't problems to solve but passages to navigate? The desert strips away everything non-essential. It forces you to discover what remains when all the external props are removed. I've seen people emerge from these desert periods fundamentally transformed, not because they found some external solution, but because they discovered an internal strength they never knew they possessed. The desert teaches you that you can survive on less than you thought, that your essential self doesn't depend on the circumstances you once believed were necessary for your happiness. This leads us to the 10th step, where faith transforms from belief into living trust. There's a profound difference between believing something and knowing it in your bones. When Jesus walked on water, he wasn't defying physics to impress people. He was demonstrating what becomes possible when you operate from unshakable inner knowing rather than external circumstances. Most of us live our lives like the water beneath our feet determines whether we sink or swim. We let our emotions, our bank accounts, our relationships, our health, all these external conditions dictate our internal state. But the 10th step teaches you to walk on whatever waters you're facing, not because you've transcended them, but because you've discovered something within yourself that remains stable regardless of what's happening around you. Here's what most people don't understand about this phase. These challenges aren't punishments. They're initiations. Every loss, every rejection, every moment of confusion is designed to burn away what's false and reveal what's eternally true. But the process feels like dissolution because, in many ways, the person you thought you were is dying, so the person you actually are can be born. Many people turn back at this stage. They feel themselves dissolving and panic, thinking something's gone wrong. They rush back to old patterns, old relationships, old identities that feel safer. But this is like a butterfly trying to crawl back into its cocoon. The transformation has already begun. The only choice is whether to trust the process or fight it. The question isn't whether you're strong enough to handle this crucifixion of the false self. The question is whether you're ready to discover who you become when everything that isn't really you falls away. You've learned to question the programming. You've walked through the fire of ego dissolution. Now comes something far more subtle and infinitely more powerful, learning to receive wisdom rather than chase it. The 11th step marks a profound shift in how truth enters your consciousness. Up until now, you've been accumulating knowledge, studying concepts, analyzing spiritual principles. But Jesus never said, "Understand me." He said, "Follow me." There's a crucial difference between intellectual comprehension and embodied knowing, and most seekers never make this transition. Think about how Jesus taught. He didn't deliver theological dissertations or systematic philosophies. He told stories about seeds and soil, wedding feasts, and lost coins. Why? Because the deepest truths can't be transmitted through logical explanation. They arrive through symbol, metaphor, and vibrational resonance. When he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed," he wasn't giving botanical information. He was encoding a living transmission that bypasses the analytical mind and plants itself directly in consciousness. This is what happens in the 11th step. You stop trying to figure out spiritual reality and start receiving it. Your consciousness becomes receptive rather than acquisitive. Instead of asking, "What does this mean?" you begin to feel what it means. The shift is unmistakable once it occurs. The 12th step teaches you the language of spirit, how divine intelligence communicates through the fabric of daily experience. This isn't mystical fantasy, it's practical navigation. You start recognizing guidance through synchronicities, dreams, sudden insights, and energetic feelings that arise in your body. Here's how this works in real life. You wake up thinking about an old friend you haven't spoken to in years. Later that day, they call or you run into them unexpectedly. Most people dismiss this as coincidence, but you're learning to read the deeper currents. That morning impulse was spirit preparing you for connection, showing you the invisible threads that weave through apparent randomness. Or you're browsing in a bookstore and feel inexplicably drawn to a particular section. You find yourself holding a book that speaks directly to a question you've been carrying. You didn't plan this encounter, it found you. This is how wisdom seeks the prepared consciousness. Nature becomes one of your greatest teachers in this language. You're wrestling with a difficult decision when you notice how water moves around obstacles in a stream, always finding its way forward without force. The teaching arrives not through words but through direct perception. The water shows you something about flowing with circumstances rather than fighting them. Pay attention to your energy responses to people and situations. Your body becomes an exquisite instrument for reading truth. You meet someone new and feel an immediate expansion in your chest. This person carries something beneficial for your path. You enter a room and feel subtle contraction. There's disharmony here that doesn't serve your highest good. These aren't judgments, they're navigation signals. The 13th step transforms your relationship with silence completely. Silence is no longer the absence of sound, but the presence of listening. This is why Jesus constantly retreated to mountains to pray. He wasn't petitioning for favors or making requests. He was attuning to divine frequency. Most people are terrified of real silence because it strips away all the mental noise they use to avoid themselves. But you're discovering that silence is where transmission occurs. In the space between thoughts, wisdom downloads directly into awareness. In the pause between breaths, you touch something eternal. Create sacred spaces for this inner listening. It might be 20 minutes of morning meditation, contemplative walks in nature, or simply sitting quietly before sleep. The key is consistent practice of receptive attention. You're not trying to achieve anything or get anywhere. You're learning to be present to what's already here. During these periods, thoughts will arise. Let them pass like clouds across sky. Emotions will surface. Acknowledge them without engagement. Gradually, you discover the vast spaciousness that exists beneath all mental activity. This is your true nature, and it's been waiting patiently for your recognition. The 14th step awakens what mystics call unitive consciousness, the direct perception of interconnection where others see only separation. This completely transforms how you experience difficult people and challenging situations. Instead of seeing enemies and obstacles, you begin recognizing teachers and opportunities. That demanding boss who triggers your anger, they're showing you where you still need to develop patience and inner authority. The family member who pushes all your buttons, they're illuminating exactly which buttons need to be dissolved. The financial crisis that disrupts your plans, it's redirecting you towards something more aligned with your authentic path. This isn't positive thinking or spiritual bypassing. It's recognizing that consciousness uses every experience for awakening. Even your failures become sacred curriculum. The business that didn't work revealed your attachment to external validation. The relationship that ended taught you about self-love. The illness that slowed you down forced you to discover inner stillness. From this perspective, nothing is wasted. Everything serves the larger educational process of remembering who you really are. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop making choices. It means you stop fighting reality and start cooperating with its deeper intelligence. The 15th step aligns you with cosmic rhythm, the natural flow that moves planets, seasons, and all life. You discover what Taoists call wu-wei, effortless action that accomplishes more through presence than struggle ever could. Jesus demonstrated this constantly. He never seemed hurried or forced, yet his impact transformed human consciousness forever. Watch how you relate to time and outcomes now. Instead of pushing against circumstances, you find yourself moving with their currents. Instead of forcing doors open, you notice which ones open naturally. Instead of manipulating people toward your agenda, you trust that right relationships will unfold organically. This level of consciousness naturally flowers into compassion and service, not as moral obligation but as spontaneous expression of expanded awareness. When you truly see that others are yourself in different forms, helping them becomes as natural as caring for your own hand when it's injured. You can't learn this wisdom from courses or books, though they may point you in the right direction. It only awakens through lived experience and inner attunement. Each step requires your direct participation, your willingness to move beyond concepts into embodied knowing. The silence is calling you deeper. Are you ready to listen? We've explored how silence becomes your teacher, and how the false self begins its dissolution. But now we reach the most challenging passage in this ancient map, steps 16 through 20, where everything you thought you knew about yourself must die for your authentic nature to be born. Step 16 marks the threshold crossing. This isn't some gentle transition you read about in spiritual books. It's the moment when the identity you've carried your entire life begins to feel foreign, like wearing clothes that no longer fit. You might wake up one morning and genuinely not recognize the person looking back from the mirror, not physically but energetically. The roles, the personality traits, even the preferences that once defined you start feeling hollow, performative. Jesus in Gethsemane gives us the archetypal map for this crossing. The text tells us he sweat blood, a rare medical condition called hematidrosis that occurs under extreme psychological stress. This wasn't theatrical anguish. This was a human being facing the complete dissolution of personal will in favor of something infinitely larger. Not my will, but yours be done, represents the most terrifying surrender imaginable, letting go of the steering wheel of your own life. Most people never reach this threshold because it feels like death, and in a very real sense, it island. The mystics called it the dark night of the soul, but that phrase has been so overused it's lost its power. What we're really talking about is the collapse of every familiar support system, your sense of purpose, your understanding of who you are, even your relationship with your own thoughts and emotions. I've witnessed people in this phase describe it as feeling like they're dissolving from the inside out. One woman told me it was like watching herself become a stranger to herself. Everything she had worked to build, her career identity, her relationship patterns, her spiritual practices, suddenly felt meaningless. This wasn't depression, though it can look similar from the outside. Depression typically involves attachment to what's been lost. This is different. It's a fundamental questioning of whether there was ever anything real there to lose in the first place. Step 17 brings radical emptiness. If the threshold crossing feels like dissolution, this phase is complete liquefaction. Like a caterpillar in the chrysalis, the old structures don't just change, they completely break down into undifferentiated essence. The caterpillar doesn't gradually sprout wings. It literally becomes soup first. This is where Jesus' arrest and trial become profoundly instructive. Watch how he responds to Pilate's interrogation. When asked if he's a king, he doesn't defend his identity or argue his case. He's moved beyond personal agenda entirely. The man who once drove money changers from the temple now stands silent before his accusers, having surrendered every trace of personal will to cosmic purpose. People in this phase often describe feeling like they're living in a void. The old motivations are gone, but new ones haven't emerged yet. You might find yourself going through the motions of daily life while feeling completely hollow inside. This isn't spiritual bypassing or emotional numbness. It's the necessary emptying that precedes authentic rebirth. The 18th step marks the birth of Christ consciousness, and this has nothing to do with religious conversion. Christ consciousness is simply awakened awareness, recognizing its own divine nature. It's the moment when you realize that what you thought was you was actually a collection of conditioned responses, and what you actually are is the awareness that was always observing those responses. This manifests as a radical shift in your operational center, where you once reacted from fear, protection, and personal agenda. You now respond from unconditional compassion. Not the sentimental kind that depends on people being lovable, but the fierce compassion that recognizes the sacred essence, even in those who seem most lost. Jesus demonstrates this perfectly from the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This isn't moral superiority or religious platitude. This is consciousness so expanded it can see through the surface drama to the underlying innocence of beings trapped in unconscious patterns. When you truly understand that people's harmful actions come from their disconnection from their own divine nature, forgiveness becomes as natural as breathing. Step 19 establishes the heart as your new command center. The mind, which once ran the show through analysis, planning, and control, becomes a useful tool rather than your primary identity. The heart's intelligence operates differently. It knows through direct perception rather than logical deduction. It includes rather than excludes, synthesizes rather than separates. This doesn't mean becoming emotional or irrational. Heart-centered consciousness is actually far more intelligent than mind-dominated awareness because it can hold paradox, complexity, and nuance without needing to resolve everything into neat categories. You might find yourself knowing exactly what to do in complex situations without being able to explain your reasoning. You'll trust hunches that prove remarkably accurate. You'll speak words that surprise even you with their wisdom. The 20th step brings complete integration, the eternal identity taking command of daily life. This is resurrection consciousness, where you operate from the unshakable knowing that your essential nature transcends all circumstances. Jesus' resurrection wasn't a supernatural event to believe in. It's a symbol of consciousness that has moved beyond all limitations, including the ultimate limitation of death itself. People often ask me why this passage has to be so difficult. Why can't spiritual awakening be gentler, more gradual? Here's the truth. Because authentic transformation requires the complete reorganization of your entire system. You can't become a butterfly while clinging to caterpillar consciousness. The old structure has to dissolve completely for the new one to emerge. Too many spiritual seekers try to bypass this phase, seeking only light and love without the transformational fire that makes genuine awakening possible. They want the fruits of enlightenment without the death that precedes rebirth, but there are no shortcuts through the eye of the needle. The ego must die for the authentic self to live. If you're in this passage now, know that what feels like destruction is actually the most sacred creative process in existence, the birth of your true nature. When you've walked through the symbolic death we explored in the previous section, something extraordinary begins to emerge. You don't wake up one morning and decide to become more loving. Love starts flowing through you like water finding its natural course. This is the 21st step, the emergence of unconditional love, and it's nothing like the emotional affection we usually call love. This divine love doesn't pick favorites. It doesn't require anyone to earn it or reciprocate it. Think of sunlight. It doesn't shine brighter on beautiful flowers and dim itself for weeds. It simply radiates, and whatever receives it benefits according to its capacity. When Jesus loved tax collectors, prostitutes, and Roman soldiers, he wasn't performing some heroic act of moral willpower. He was simply being what he had become, a clear channel through which divine love could flow unobstructed. Watch how this works in your own experience. When you're truly present with someone, not thinking about what to say next, not judging their appearance or opinions, just fully there, something shifts in the space between you. That shift isn't something you create, it's something you allow. The love was always there, waiting for your ego's commentary to quiet down enough for it to emerge. This naturally leads us to the 22nd step, where service stops being something you force yourself to do and becomes as natural as breathing. Here's what most people miss about spiritual service. It's not about being a good person or earning cosmic points. When you genuinely see yourself in others, serving them becomes a form of self-care extended infinitely outward. Remember when Jesus washed his disciples' feet? The traditional interpretation focuses on humility, but look deeper. This wasn't a lesson in being humble, it was a demonstration of how consciousness naturally flows. Water always moves downward, not because it's trying to be humble, but because that's its nature. Enlightened consciousness serves because separation has dissolved. When you truly understand that the homeless person on the corner is yourself in different circumstances, helping them isn't charity, it's self-preservation on a cosmic scale. I've watched this transformation in people who've undergone genuine awakening experiences. They don't become saints overnight, but they do become naturally responsive to suffering around them. It's not dramatic or showy. They might start bringing extra coffee to work for colleagues, or find themselves really listening when their teenager wants to talk, or feel genuinely moved to help a neighbor with groceries. The service emerges organically from expanded awareness, not from spiritual ambition. The 23rd step takes this even further into what we might call medicinal presence. This is where you begin to understand that your state of consciousness literally affects the quantum field around you. Every thought, every emotion, every level of presence or distraction ripples outward in ways we're only beginning to understand scientifically. You've experienced this yourself, though you might not have recognized it. Think about people who make you feel calmer just by being in the room with them. They're not doing anything special, not giving advice or trying to fix you, but somehow your nervous system relaxes in their presence. That's medicinal presence in action. Their clear consciousness creates a field of coherence that your system naturally entrains to. On the flip side, you've probably also experienced the opposite, walking into a room where there's been an argument and feeling the tension immediately, even if no one says a word. Consciousness isn't contained within the boundaries of our skulls. It's a field phenomenon, And awakened consciousness generates a field that can dissolve fear, tension, and even physical symptoms in others. This isn't mystical wishful thinking. Quantum physics shows us that consciousness and matter are intimately connected at the most fundamental levels of reality. When someone with genuinely clear presence enters a chaotic environment, a hospital room, a tense family gathering, a workplace in crisis, the field itself begins to reorganize around that coherence. People start thinking more clearly, speaking more truthfully, feeling safer to be vulnerable. The 24th step expands this love beyond human relationships to embrace all of existence. This is where you begin to love the sunrise, not because it's beautiful, but because you recognize the same divine intelligence that moves through you, also orchestrates the rotation of planets. You love the rain because you understand it as another expression of the cosmic dance you're part of. You even begin to love difficulty and pain as teachers, as the very friction that polishes consciousness into clarity. When Jesus said that whatever we do to the least of these, we do to him, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. This was a precise description of unified consciousness. In awakened awareness, there is no other to love. There's only the one divine presence appearing as infinite forms. Loving your enemy becomes as natural as loving your right hand when your left hand is injured. This universal love doesn't mean becoming a doormat or losing discernment. You can love someone completely, while still maintaining clear boundaries. You can love the essence of a person, while not enabling their destructive behaviors. Love and wisdom aren't opposites. They're dance partners. The 25th step represents the full consecration of your life as service to the divine plan. This is where personal ambition doesn't get suppressed. It simply becomes irrelevant. When you're aligned with the cosmic intelligence that's orchestrating the evolution of consciousness itself, your individual will naturally harmonize with that larger movement. Jesus exemplified this perfectly. He had no personal agenda, no career ambitions, no retirement plan. Every action arose spontaneously from his alignment with divine purpose. This doesn't mean becoming passive or losing your unique gifts. Rather, your talents become instruments through which cosmic intelligence can express itself more fully in the world. What's crucial to understand is that none of these qualities can be manufactured through willpower or moral effort. They emerge naturally from awakened consciousness, like fruit appearing on a tree that has reached maturity. This is why authentic spiritual development always leads to greater capacity for love and service, while ego-based spirituality remains fundamentally self-focused, no matter how spiritual it appears on the surface. The awakened become what the original teachings call silent agents of collective healing, transforming environments through presence rather than preaching, serving the evolution of consciousness simply by being what they truly are. When you reach the 26th step, something extraordinary happens. You stop trying to be spiritual and simply discover that you already are. This isn't about meditation cushions or prayer beads anymore. It's about recognizing that the very awareness reading these words right now is the same consciousness that Jesus described when he said, "I and the Father are one." Think about how a river doesn't struggle to flow downhill. It simply follows the natural pull of gravity, moving effortlessly around obstacles, carving its path through the landscape without resistance. At this stage of the journey, your life begins to operate with that same natural flow. Decisions arise spontaneously from a place of deep knowing rather than anxious planning. You find yourself in the right place at the right time, not through careful orchestration, but because you've learned to trust the invisible current that's always been guiding you. This is what mystics throughout history have called divine guidance. But it's not some external force puppeteering your movements. It's the recognition that your deepest intuition and the intelligence of the universe are the same thing. When Jesus said he only did what he saw the Father doing, he wasn't describing religious obedience. He was pointing to this state where personal will and cosmic intelligence merge into one seamless expression. The 27th step brings what might be the most profound shift of the entire journey, the dissolution of the separate self. But here's what's fascinating. You don't lose your personality or become some blank-faced spiritual zombie. Instead, you realize that what you thought was you was actually just a collection of thoughts, memories, and reactions floating in a vast space of pure awareness. Imagine you've spent your whole life thinking you were a wave, worried about your shape, your size, comparing yourself to other waves. Then suddenly you realize you're not the wave at all. You're the ocean itself, temporarily expressing as this particular waveform. The wave doesn't disappear, but the anxiety about being a wave completely dissolves because you know your true nature is limitless. Advanced meditators across every tradition report this same recognition. In Zen, they call it original face. In Advaita Vedanta, it's self-realization. Christian mystics, like Meister Eckhart, described it as discovering the God within. The language differs, but the experience is remarkably consistent. The sudden recognition that you are the awareness in which all experience appears, not a separate person having experiences. This isn't philosophical theory, it's as direct and unmistakable as recognizing your own hand. You realize you've always been the space in which thoughts arise and dissolve, the stillness in which emotions come and go, the unchanging presence that has witnessed every moment of your life. The seeker disappears because you discover there was never anyone separate to seek anything. The 28th step unfolds as the direct experience of unity consciousness. The boundaries you've spent a lifetime maintaining between inside and outside, sacred and mundane, self and other, reveal themselves as useful illusions rather than ultimate truths. This isn't a belief system you adopt. It's more like suddenly seeing colors after a lifetime of color blindness. When Jesus healed the sick, he wasn't performing supernatural magic tricks. He was operating from a level of consciousness where the apparent separation between healer and patient, problem and solution, had dissolved. From unity consciousness, healing happens naturally because there's no other to be separate from. The same awareness that recognizes suffering is the awareness that dissolves it. This is why the advanced stages of consciousness appear miraculous from ordinary awareness. When you know yourself as the field in which all experience arises, synchronicities become natural because there's no separation between inner intention and outer circumstance. Information flows freely because the boundaries that seem to block it were never actually there. Healing presence radiates effortlessly because love is simply the recognition of unity expressing itself. These aren't supernatural powers you develop. They're natural capacities that emerge when consciousness is no longer limited by the belief in separation. Quantum physics has begun to validate what mystics have always known. At the deepest level, everything is interconnected, and consciousness plays a fundamental role in shaping reality. The 29th step represents complete integration, enlightenment that doesn't require special conditions or sacred spaces to maintain itself. You don't need to retreat from the world to access awakened consciousness. Instead, awakened consciousness engages fully with whatever appears. After his resurrection, Jesus appeared and disappeared naturally, walked through walls, yet still broke bread with his disciples and cooked fish by the sea. This perfectly illustrates consciousness that has transcended material limitations while remaining lovingly engaged with the world of form. The awakened state doesn't reject the human experience, it includes and transcends it. This integration might be the most challenging aspect for many seekers to understand. We often imagine enlightenment as some permanently blissful state where problems never arise and life becomes perpetually easy. But true integration means maintaining clarity and presence, whether you're experiencing joy or sorrow, success or failure, health or illness. The consciousness that recognizes itself as unlimited doesn't need to control circumstances to remain at peace. It's like space itself, completely unaffected by whatever appears within it, yet intimately present with everything that arises. These descriptions might sound fantastical, like spiritual science fiction, but they're actually the most natural thing in the world. Every tradition has its awakened beings who demonstrate these capacities. They're not special humans with supernatural powers. They're ordinary consciousness that has remembered its true nature. What makes this journey so remarkable is that these aren't achievements you attain through effort. They're natural states you uncover by removing what obscures them. Like clearing dust from a mirror doesn't create the mirror's capacity to reflect. It simply reveals what was always there. The invitation at this stage isn't to believe these descriptions, but to investigate your own direct experience. Who or what is aware of these words right now? What is the nature of the awareness that witnesses your thoughts and emotions? These aren't philosophical questions, they're pointers to the recognition that transforms everything. We've journeyed through 29 steps together, watching consciousness expand beyond every boundary we thought was real. But now we arrive at something that challenges even the most awakened understanding. The final 3 steps aren't just about becoming enlightened, they're about discovering that the very one who sought enlightenment was never there to begin with. Step 30 marks what mystics call the final crossing, but it's unlike anything we've explored so far. Here, the seeker doesn't just experience unity with the divine, the seeker dissolves entirely into pure being itself. Think of a wave that has spent its entire existence believing it was separate from the ocean. It rises, it falls, it crashes against shores, always maintaining its sense of individual identity. Then suddenly, in one moment of complete recognition, it realizes there never was a wave at all, only ocean, appearing as wave. This isn't death as we understand it. Death implies something real coming to an end. This is the recognition that the separate self was always an elaborate illusion, like a dream character discovering it's actually the dreamer. When Jesus hung on the cross and cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This wasn't despair. This was the final dissolution of even his enlightened human identity. The me that could feel forsaken was disappearing into the very God it thought had abandoned it. What's remarkable about this stage is how reality itself begins to respond differently. Time doesn't just slow down or speed up. It becomes completely irrelevant. Past and future collapse into an eternal now that has no reference points. Space bends around consciousness rather than containing it. The body, which once felt solid and separate, becomes something more like a living frequency, a vibrating instrument through which invisible forces express themselves in the physical realm. I've studied accounts from mystics across cultures who describe reaching this threshold. They all report the same phenomenon, the moment when even their spiritual identity, the one who had been seeking God, the one who had been serving others, the one who had been enlightened, simply evaporates. What remains isn't a person having a spiritual experience. It's pure awareness temporarily focused through what appears to be a human form. Step 31 goes even deeper into what can only be called ultimate surrender. This isn't surrendering your ego or your desires, or even your will. This is the soul's complete release of any sense of individual existence whatsoever. When Jesus spoke his final words, "Into your hands I commit my spirit," he was demonstrating the deepest level of spiritual trust imaginable. He wasn't just surrendering his life, he was surrendering the very essence of personal identity into pure source. This might sound like spiritual suicide, and I understand why some traditions have been cautious about teaching these final stages. But what actually happens is the exact opposite of death. What dies is the illusion of separation. What's born is the recognition of immortal consciousness that was never truly individual to begin with. It's like a drop of water fearing it will be lost when it merges with the ocean, only to discover it becomes the entire ocean. The level of faith required here goes beyond anything we normally associate with belief. This is trusting existence so completely that personal survival becomes irrelevant. Not because life doesn't matter, but because you realize you are life itself, expressing through countless forms simultaneously. The fear of losing yourself transforms into wonder at how you ever believed you were confined to just one perspective. Step 32 represents pure manifestation, consciousness operating as direct expression of divine will, without any personal agenda whatsoever. Jesus' resurrection appearances perfectly illustrate this state. He wasn't a person who had conquered death, he was divine love itself, temporarily appearing in forms that others could recognize and interact with. Watch how he manifested differently to different people. Sometimes they recognized him immediately, sometimes they didn't. His form adapted to what each person needed to receive. Beings at this level become bridges between dimensions. They help others remember their true nature, not through teaching or preaching, but simply through presence. Their very existence in the world serves as a reminder that these states are possible, that consciousness can transcend every limitation while still engaging compassionately with those who are learning. What's fascinating is how this final stage often makes beings invisible to history. They're not interested in recognition or followers or building movements. They serve quietly, often unknown, touching lives through presence rather than personality. They might appear as the stranger who shows up exactly when you need help, the person whose simple words shift your entire perspective, or the presence you feel in moments of deep prayer or meditation. These descriptions point toward experiences that language can barely touch, but they represent the natural destiny of consciousness freed from all illusions of separation. Buddhist nirvana, Hindu moksha, Sufi fana, different words pointing toward the same ultimate recognition. This isn't culturally specific, it's the universal potential that lies dormant in every human heart. The beautiful paradox is that reaching these final steps reveals they were never steps at all. There was never anywhere to go, nothing to achieve, no one to become. The entire journey was consciousness playing hide and seek with itself, temporarily forgetting its true nature so it could experience the joy of remembering again. This is where Jesus' map has been leading us all along, not to some distant spiritual destination, but to the recognition of what we've always been, wearing the temporary costume of individual identity, playing in the grand theater of awakening consciousness. And here we arrive at the ultimate paradox, step 33, the return to ordinary enlightenment. After ascending through every dimension of consciousness, after dissolving into the cosmic absolute, after experiencing the complete annihilation of the separate self, what happens next? You come back to exactly where you started. You wake up, brush your teeth, make coffee, and go about your day. But something has fundamentally shifted. Everything is exactly the same, yet nothing will ever be the same again. This 33rd step isn't really a step at all, it's the recognition that there was never anywhere to go. The entire journey, all 32 preceding stages, was consciousness playing an elaborate game with itself, pretending to be lost so it could experience the joy of remembering what it never actually forgot. Think of it like this. You're searching frantically for your glasses while they're sitting on top of your head the entire time. The moment you realize where they are, you don't become a different person, you just stop searching. Jesus, after the ascension, represents this completed cycle perfectly. He doesn't disappear into some ethereal realm, never to return. Instead, consciousness that has walked the full path from incarnation through awakening now serves as a bridge between worlds. This is why the resurrection narratives are so fascinating. Jesus appears completely ordinary, walking along roads, cooking fish by the shore, sharing meals. The disciples often don't even recognize him at first. He's not glowing with supernatural light or floating 3 feet off the ground. He's just profoundly, authentically human. But there's something else present, a quality that transforms everything around him without any effort whatsoever. People feel inexplicably peaceful in his presence. Their own inner wisdom suddenly becomes more accessible. Hope rekindles in their hearts for reasons they can't quite articulate. This is how the 33rd step manifests in our world, through beings who walk among us as complete equals, while carrying a resonance that awakens others simply through proximity. I've encountered people like this, and you probably have too, though you might not have recognized what you were experiencing at the time. They're the ones who somehow make you feel more like yourself when you're around them. They listen with a quality of attention that makes you hear your own words differently. They ask simple questions that unlock insights you didn't know you possessed. They never try to fix you or teach you or convince you of anything, yet conversations with them leave you feeling mysteriously renewed. What's remarkable about these individuals is how utterly ordinary they appear on the surface. They might be cashiers at grocery stores, mechanics, nurses, teachers, gardeners. They're not wearing robes or speaking in mystical language or advertising their spiritual attainments. In fact, they often seem refreshingly free from spiritual pretense altogether. They laugh easily, engage fully with whatever task is in front of them, and treat every person they encounter with the same natural respect. This is the great secret of the 33rd step. True enlightenment doesn't create spiritual superiority. Instead, it reveals the sacred ordinary. God isn't found in some transcendent realm accessible only through years of meditation and ascetic practice. The divine is breathing through your lungs right now, walking through your feet, seeing through your eyes. Every mundane moment, washing dishes, waiting in traffic, having awkward conversations with neighbors, becomes a portal to the infinite when you're no longer seeking the infinite somewhere else. The 33rd step represents the completion of what we might call the consciousness curriculum. You've learned to identify with the body, then transcend body identification. You've developed a personality, then seen through the personality to the awareness that observes it. You've experienced separation, then reunion, then the recognition that separation was always an illusion. You've sought God everywhere until you finally realized that what you were seeking was what was doing the seeking all along. But here's what makes this level of consciousness so naturally effective in serving collective awakening. It operates entirely without agenda. People at the 33rd step aren't trying to enlighten anyone. They're not carrying around a secret mission to transform humanity. They've simply returned to their authentic nature, and authenticity is contagious in the most beautiful way. When you encounter someone who has genuinely stopped pretending to be anything other than what they are, it gives you permission to stop pretending too. This connects directly to what Jesus actually came to demonstrate. Not that he was uniquely divine and should be worshipped, but that divine nature is every human being's birthright. Christ consciousness isn't the exclusive property of one historical figure. It's the recognition of what we all are beneath the layers of conditioning and false identification. Jesus came as a preview of human potential, not as an exception to it. The 33rd step reveals the ultimate cosmic joke. The entire spiritual journey was consciousness exploring itself, playing the most elaborate game of hide-and-seek imaginable. It forgot its true nature so completely that it could experience the absolute wonder of remembering. Every step of seeking, every moment of suffering, every breakthrough and setback was part of consciousness investigating its own depths, like a dreamer who becomes so absorbed in the dream that they forget they're dreaming until the moment of awakening. This brings us back to why 33 isn't arbitrary in this framework. These steps reflect the natural architecture of consciousness evolution, the predictable stages awareness goes through as it moves from complete identification with form to recognition of its formless essence. Then back to form again with full knowledge of what it actually island. It's like a spiral that appears to end where it began, but at a completely different level of understanding. Understanding this map doesn't require following it as some kind of religious prescription. Different people will move through these stages in different ways, at different speeds, with different emphases. Some might skip certain steps entirely, while others might spend lifetimes exploring the nuances of a single stage. The value isn't in rigid adherence to a predetermined path, but in recognizing where you are in your own development and what might be naturally emerging next. What's beautiful about the 33rd step is how it honors every previous stage while being attached to none of them. Someone operating from this level might still experience emotions, still have preferences, still face practical challenges. But there's a fundamental relaxation present, a deep okayness with whatever is arising. They've stopped trying to be somewhere other than where they are, which paradoxically makes them available to serve whatever the moment requires. These principles transcend any specific religious tradition while honoring the wisdom they all contain. Whether you approach this through Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, indigenous spirituality, or no formal tradition at all, consciousness follows similar patterns in its journey home to itself. The 33rd step represents the universal recognition that home was never actually lost. We just needed to travel the full circle to realize we never left. So as you consider your own journey within this framework, remember that enlightenment isn't about achieving some extraordinary state that separates you from ordinary human experience. It's about discovering the extraordinary nature of what you've always been, right here in the midst of your perfectly imperfect, beautifully mundane, absolutely sacred everyday life. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."